Ladies and gentlemen, we will. There we go. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll call the Ad Valorem Subcommittee of Ways and Means to order. And I am not wearing a tie today. I hope you guys recognize it. Representative Leverett, you're going to bring us for a hearing only House Bill 1094 as we start the process. You can take that one right there. Where should I? Right here at the end. And your mic is on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to bring to you House Bill 1094. This bill was, the genesis of this bill was a conversation or a request made of me by one of my county commission chairs. As you may know, there is a statutory, well, there's a statute that provides a statutory form for a reassessment notice. So when someone's property is reevaluated by the assessors, there's a notice that's sent to the property owner and they have a certain amount of time to appeal. The statute actually sets out the form, some of the language that must be contained in that notice, and it also requires that an estimate of the taxes be provided. Of course, that's a difficult thing to do from year to year because property taxes are dependent upon two things. One is the assessment or the valuation, which this is a notice when there's a change in that. The other issue or the other factor that goes in determining taxes is the millage rate, which is set by the county commission from year to year. And frequently when there's a countywide reassessment, as you know, under the taxpayer Bill of Rights, the county has to give notice and publish. And if they're going to leave the mill rate as the same or not reduce it to be revenue neutral, they have to basically publish an ad saying that they're going to pass a tax increase. So frequently those millage rates actually drop after large assessments. And even when there's only a partial assessment of some of the counties. So one of my county commissioners noted that is this estimate in the notice is the source of much angst and anguish amongst taxpayers and also amongst commissioners who get numerous calls whenever these notices are sent out. So he asked if I would file this, which would, it doesn't affect the appeal rights. It doesn't affect the timeline. It doesn't affect any of that. And it doesn't affect the form except for the estimate. It would eliminate that estimate. And I understand that much of this statute was the result of a rather protracted negotiation years ago and some compromises where some members wanted the tax bill to be appealable, but that really doesn't work well logistically with respect to the timeline of county finances. So we've preserved with this statute the assessment being appealable. This doesn't change that. It just changes the inclusion of an estimate, which we view to be inherently inaccurate and sometimes misleading. I know you generally do want to give people more information rather than less, but I don't think you want to give them bad information. So that's part of the reason for the proposed change this bill would make. I would know, Mr. Chairman, there is a phrase in here which we missed. The bill went through a few drafts. We caught a few things, but we missed a phrase that should be stricken also on line 12. The bill currently reads, you have a right to an appeal of the current year's taxes for all levying authorities. That phrase actually should be deleted with it. It modifies the word estimate, which we're removing. So all of that should also be deleted. And I guess if this bill were to make it to committee, I would have a substitute to strike that language. That's just a technical change. It doesn't change the general intent and effect of the bill.
Representative Buckner.
I was involved in that conversation. It was downstairs and it was rather warm and very long. If we take all of that out that you want to remove, what are we sending then?
You'd still be sending them the assessment. You'd send them the value. So they'd still know what the current value is and what the proposed reassessed value is. So I think from that, they could get a sense of the change. And if it's more, they're going to, I think, intuitively figure the taxes may go up. So they may still make the call, but at least we're not giving them the bad information.
Mr. Chairman.
Really the same question I had, Representative Leverett, is, what is the trigger? What is going to let them know that they need to appeal if this is kind of their notice for that particular appeal? I mean, and you answered that. I guess that's just my My concern is that whether or not it's going to properly alert the taxpayer to whether or not they need to file an appeal. Be my only concern.
Well, and I understand that concern. I mean, I understand the concern that you want to give them more information rather than less, but you're not hiding from them the fact that the assessment is increasing. I mean, that's clearly stated. It'd be very evident. That's still evident. We're not changing that portion. We're just removing that one number, which is the estimate of the tax value, because we don't believe it's really accurate, and it causes a lot of consternation and a lot of time for commissioners that they could perhaps better spend on other conversations.
Chairman Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Leverett, I think I'm coming at it from a different angle, not whether or not it gives them enough information to think they might need to appeal the assessment, because the assessment in all probability is going to be fairly accurate and defensible. I come at it from the taxpayer standpoint that absent a rollback of the millage rate, it in fact is a property tax increase. And I stand on the fact that the taxpayers ought to be made aware of the fact that this is the county is going to collect more revenue on the same assessed properties as it did the year before. On the entire digest is what I'm trying to say. That really there's going to be a revenue increase for the county rather than taking that additional tax base with, it could be the new properties coming in and even with the higher assessments, it's in effect a tax increase. They didn't roll back the millage rate to only what they needed.
Well, understand, I'm not proposing to change the taxpayer bill of rights and the publication requirements. This is only with respect to the one notice that's mailed to the taxpayer with regard to their property. We're just removing an estimate of taxes because you don't really know what they're going to be until the millage rate gets set. The county is still going to have to go through that whole process you've described.
Okay, so this is not in lieu of the tax.
No, sir. No, sir.
Okay.
All we're doing is there's one piece of paper that gets mailed to you if your tax assessment is increased, and we're going to change that piece of paper in one respect. We remove the estimate of taxes. Now, I think to Chairman Blackman's, he feels that information should be provided, and I respect that position.
Not necessarily. I just want to make sure that we are given, that there's not an underlying and an additional reason why we might need to include something like that, or did include it, or, so on and so forth. I appreciate the bill, and I appreciate the objective of the bill that you bring. I just want to, ask that question, make sure we, vet that, enough that we
Certainly.
don't.
And I certainly don't want people not to have information, but I think when they see the assessment and they see the values up, they will figure there's a chance of that. So it may not solve the problem that was the original genesis of it, but I think it would at least avoid unduly alarming people when there may not be cause for that. The taxpayer bill of rights notice would still have to be given, and if they'd still have an opportunity to see that if there was not going to be a substantial rollback. And that's when the calls would happen.
Let me follow up a little bit more. In the situation, let's just say that I bought a house that, and of course you get the tax notice is forwarded to you the next year. Typically at closing, you pay your portion of the property tax if it's up until that certain point that's prorated. And you may not get that property tax until it's given to you by the previous homeowner. If you don't have an idea of what the property tax was, even in an estimate, once he gets the tax bill, for the purpose of the homeowner, you may be caught totally flat-footed as to what the tax might be, because it'll be the first time that you've even seen a tax bill. I guess that's any ideas on that scenario?
Well, I share that concern. I mean, as a real estate closing attorney, that occasionally happens. I would just say this bill does not address that issue, but it also does nothing to increase or create that issue. I think the issue the chairman's talking about is where you have a sale before the assessment comes out, and the assessment doesn't always make it into the hands of the buyer. Or maybe the seller's received it prior to that closing, but hasn't shared it with the closing attorney or with the buyer. This really wouldn't change that. but it's sort of an issue that's outside the scope of the bill. I don't think it worsens it, but it doesn't try to address that issue. I think that would take a different kind of change.
Okay.
In other words, I believe again, I'm not proposing that the county just say, well, we're going to increase your taxes, but we're not going to, or we're going to increase your assessment, but we're not going to tell you what it is. They still have to give you the amount of the assessment in that notice.
I don't hear it on there, but maybe it's over now.
They have to tell you the assessed value. They just have to tell you, they don't have to, because it's going to be based on a previous year's millage rate anyway.
And for me, I'm looking at the sticker shock of a homeowner that might, since you're a closing attorney, and I'll turn it over to the CPA here that might have some more in-depth questions, but I guess I can see myself walking into a scenario where, granted, it might not be the exact bill, but I'll have some idea of what the tax bill might be the following year. Would you mind taking over, Mr. Chairman? This is your committee. Thank you, Representative.
If they want.
My apologies to the chairman and committee. We had another committee that had a vote, so we came as quick as I could. So carry on. I'm sorry, I missed a little bit of the previous conversation.
Well, I think Chairman Stevens was expressing concern. My bill would basically change the form of the notice of reassessment for property taxes by removing the estimate, which is currently required to be given. So it would not change the form otherwise. It doesn't change the appeal process, and it does not change any of the provisions of the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, which require notices and ads if the county's not going to roll back the millage rate. It simply eliminates the requirement of stating an estimate, which is in itself sometimes misleading, into that same notice of assessment. And the Chairman Stevens' concern was in the case of a property that changes hands during the year, how do you, well, he can probably state it better than I can, but I'll give it a quick shot, is that your buyer sometimes may not have knowledge of how the taxes are going to change. And I think he felt like the estimate might be of some use. I guess I would just say, again, part of the problem is that estimate is frequently misleading. And to me, the bigger problem there is the buyer doesn't always know that the tax amount has gone up because the buyer doesn't receive the notice. The owner, as of January 1, does. So this bill unfortunately doesn't address that issue, but I think that's a broader issue that requires a little heavier lifting than 2 pages.
We have, and I don't know who was first, but Representative Buckner, we'll go ahead with you.
Okay. Just a technical question, sort of. There's nothing that I see in the bill that says when that is supposed to be mailed out.
That's true. It's in a different part of the statute.
Okay, so the problem is that you don't have the millage rate set when the letter goes out.
Yes, ma'am.
Because
Not
it's-
always.
Not always. So the letter can't be detained until that millage rate is set and then sent.
I don't believe it can be, and that I think goes back to the discussion which you were party to years ago. The digest has to be fixed so the county knows what millage rate it should set.
Mhm.
And so the process of reevaluating property and working through those appeals ideally would happen substantially before the county gets ready to set its millage rate. And of course, it can't send the tax bills until the assessments and the millage rate are both determined. So frequently the assessments are done, if the county things go according to plan, they're done in advance, well in advance of the time when the millage rate will be set. So the board can have a chance to work through any appeals and get those down to a low enough number where they can still submit a digest, so the county then can decide what the millage rate needs to be to achieve the budget they've set. I hope I
No,
know
I
I
got
went
it.
on rather
I got it.
long. I apologize for that, but I
no,
hope it was
I got it.
responsive.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Knight. Just to the author of the bill, would I know there's a couple of, or maybe a technical change. Would you be amenable to if, and I know ACCG is here, but if, would it, for, the 4-Hers out there.
I think they all support my bill.
I think they do. I think they like your bill. No, I guess what I was thinking is if you were to put on there, because this is going to sound silly, maybe there are a lot of homeowners that don't really look at the millage rate all too often. It may be the only time they actually look at the millage rate if they get it on their notice. But is there a thought that maybe that's put on there without, the kind of the math being worked for,
Put the previous year's.
and state that it is the prior years and this is subject to change or something like that?
Mr. Chairman, I would be amenable to any
I-
change that the chairman thought might increase the likelihood of a due pass recommendation.
Well, but just a suggestion, maybe that's something, you might see if there's any, negative to
I would
something
be
like
glad
that.
to Discuss that with Chairman too.
Representative Weedower. Oh, I'm sorry, Stevens, my apologies.
Thank you. One more time. I guess I'm looking for the sponsor. Is this ACG's bill? Okay.
No, this was me and my home county commission chair who originated this.
Okay.
And then when all the other chairs and commissioners found out about it in my district, they expressed enthusiastic support.
And I want to help if we can get to the end. But back on the chairman, I'm not sure I agree with putting the millage rate as something that's going to help the homeowner. However, the dollars that, and maybe it's a permissive thing where we allow the counties that so choose to do that. But the idea, again, I'm getting back to the homeowner, since you're a closing attorney that might buy a house and walk into a blind situation and not have any idea what they're blowing out of the water whenever they're trying to, and they may not be going with where all of these fees and taxes and insurance are paid for through an escrow account. And they just buy it straight out for cash and then all of a sudden be hit with a tax bill they were just not prepared for.
Well, and I understand that concern. Again, I suppose my response was that that's not really affected or impacted by this bill, in my view, because you're talking about getting a notice to somebody we customarily don't send it to start with. We don't send it to in other words, when they send this notice out, they don't know that someone may have bought it. They just send it to whoever owned it as of January 1.
Who then forwards it who then forwards it to the new owner.
Hopefully, yes.
Hopefully.
Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. I've had situations where they didn't disclose it and you would assume they got the mail. So that's an issue that is, I mean, I agree with you. That's a really valid concern. It's just kind of beyond the scope of this little old bill I've got here.
I want to help you.
So, but thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought you forgot my name there for a minute. I was going to pick on you. Not that it ever happens to any of us. No, just a point of clarification. I understand the dialogue between the chairman and the author of the bill about somebody purchasing the house, but I do want to remind you that there's two sides to that equation. The purchaser, every sales document that I've ever gotten, the seller's still responsible for their proportional share of the bill, so prorated to the date of closing. So it doesn't all fall on in your example of a young couple buying a home. If they bought on September the 1st, the seller's still responsible for their proportional share of the taxes up to September the 1st in that example. So, but anyhow.
That's a good point too. Thank you, Mr. Treasurer.
I think we've got some, if I'm not mistaken, I don't know if we have any other comment or questions from the committee. If not, I think that ACCG, Clint Mueller may have signed up, I understand, to speak to the committee on this bill. You can stand up. I don't care. Representative. All right. Yeah. 7-6.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Clint Mueller with the County Commissioners Association. This is not something HG asked for, but we do support the proposed change here. Just as a little bit of historical context, this estimate on the assessment notice was not put into place until after the last housing recession. So it was, I can't remember the exact year, but it was after 2008 that this was put into the law. I do want to remind everybody that the notice that's being discussed here is the notice about your valuation. So it's your ability to appeal your value. The millage rate gets set later in the process. So these things typically go out in May, right? And then you got a 45-day window to decide if you want to start your appeal. And of course, that could take a while. But then the millage rates are getting set by the school board, the county commission, the city councils. That doesn't happen usually till late summer, and it's due, I think, by September 1st to the Department of Revenue. When we're setting the millage rate, there's other notices that are required at that point in time. We have the 5-year history, which has to go out before we set the millage rate. We also have to do the taxpayer bill of rights if we exceed the rollback rate. So we have to do that rollback calculation. If we exceed it, we have to do that notice in the paper and have the hearings. So those are all things that take place right before we set millage rates, which then determines the actual taxes that somebody's going to pay. This notice is really just about the valuation change and somebody making a decision whether they think that the proposed value on this notice reflects the actual value of their property or not. And if it doesn't reflect the actual value of their property, then they probably need to appeal it. I get surprised sometimes by the people that will even appeal when it's too low because they want it to be higher, which I don't understand that, but but that does happen. Some people get upset because the value's too low, but for tax reasons, you would probably want it to be lower if that's possible. So this is only about the value, but I think where the confusion comes in is because you're putting an estimate of the tax on here, people somehow think that that is actually the taxes that they're going to likely pay at the end of the year. And then they get focused, instead of being focused on the value and whether they should appeal the value or not, they get focused then on the estimated tax, and they start calling their school board members or county commissioner, their city council, and saying, I can't believe my taxes are going up X amount of dollars from last year. And then the local officials have to obviously explain to them, well, hold on now, we haven't set the millage rate yet. We plan on rolling back the millage rate, and that's not really what you're going to be paying. That's using last year's millage rate. And so in the environment that we're currently in right now, which we have high inflation in property values, in fact, in a lot of places, we're looking at maybe a 20% jump in the inflationary the values going up 20%. Well, if you apply last year's millage rate to a 20% jump in the value of the property, that's going to look like a huge tax increase. But the reality is most of our counties and cities are going to roll back that millage rate. If they don't completely offset the 20%, they're going to offset a good bit of it. So that the tax increase will not nearly be what it looks like on the estimate on the assessment notices. So it's not accurate information, which then gets the public all up in arms because they think their taxes are going up by what that estimate is that's shown on the assessment notice. And then they're not focused on the issue that they should be focused on, which is the value correct? And if it's not, then you need to appeal the value. They get focused on the taxes and they start calling the county commissioners, which don't have any authority to do anything about the value. Remember, that's your board of assessors, and then you go through the board of equalization or the other appeal options. So they're calling the wrong people. They're calling the county officials, the city officials, the school officials that have no recourse to do anything about the value. They need to be focused on the value and where they want to appeal that. So for that reason, because it causes confusion, we are fine with taking that out of the law. And I'm not sure how you would make it more meaningful. Back to the chairman's point, if you're going to make it more meaningful, you got to really know what the current year's millage rate is going to be. And we won't know that for several months after these notices go out. So yeah, I mean, we have no idea what will set for the current year's millage rate, but we know with high inflation that it's going to look a lot higher than it really is, especially in an inflationary market that we're in. I'd be glad to answer any questions y'all may have. Maybe I created too many questions, right?
You may have. Again, I came in late, and again, I appreciate Clint and the author. I do have some questions, and I think the committee wants to try to work as much as it can to assist if we can in this. But I do have a couple of questions. One, if you just look at the language itself, it's saying that this notice shall contain the following statements in very bold print. The estimate of your ad valorem tax bill for the current year is based on the previous or the most applicable year's millage rate, which normally is going to be
previous.
last year's, and the fair market value contained in this notice. And so and it's also explaining it may be different. Again, to your point, the millage rate, we don't know what the commissioners, the school board, in some cases, the city folks are going to set their millage rate at. But I would also want to make, is there a way we won't notice? Because a lot of times people don't understand this, and I think we would all agree that we would want to try to make sure that our property tax owners understand this or have some notice. Because again, a lot of times in today's world, we'll throw something away and we're surprised. So I'm not sure that, what route we take. Do we try to do, as the chairman I think is suggesting, is trying to improve the language so it's a little more clear, and there's maybe not some of the confusion that you and the author are trying to, I think, work towards relieving that confusion. But I would ask, on the other hand, by eliminating this period, what problems may it cause to others who are, this is giving notice and they understand the process and they're keeping up with it. So that's the question I would pose is are we also doing harm in doing this? Because I'm sure that this estimate has helped some of our property tax owners along the way prepare for, be on notice. Here's what is happening. Here's what potentially could happen. And so clarity versus just, throwing out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak, is there a way we could work towards that? That's, I guess, my thought process. And we certainly want to, help the author. And I know he's got constituents at home that have concerns. So we want to try to address them, but we also want to make sure that we're fair to others. You shouldn't open up about all the tax. While I hope most of our county, city, and school folks are going to drop those millage rates for these high inflated values, we do know that there are some that are not. I've heard mine are not. So again, there's always that in that case where, again, the right thing is to drop this back, not get the windfall. But for residents or property owners who are maybe my constituents who may be in that case, this notice would be very helpful to go, wow, I better be preparing for something a little bit higher and, quite frankly, unexpected. I may not agree with it. I may need to go appeal the value, but I need to be setting aside or being prepared to meet the tax obligation. That's my point. So again, I want to take the chairman's, maybe go from the chairman's comment and probably suggestion that we'd like to work with maybe the author and you to see if we can maybe address the concerns without, again, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, if that makes sense.
If I could, there's one other comment. This actually happens quite a bit. I hear about it a lot. So if I'm getting a 20% increase in my valuation, it may be obviously a justified 20% because values have gone up a lot, right? And I hear taxpayers say, that's the correct value. I would never sell my property for, anything less than that. But when they see that estimate on the tax bill or the estimate on the notice that shows a big jump in property taxes, right? Because they get out their property tax bill from last year and say, wow, that's a pretty big jump in my property taxes. Again, not knowing what the millage rate is actually going to be. A lot of them will appeal because they don't understand the appeal process. They don't understand, hey, the appeal process for this notice is strictly about the value. It has nothing to do with whether you like your taxes or not. But human nature is, I don't like that tax increase, right? So I'm going to appeal. This is my opportunity to appeal because I'm mad about the tax increase. Well, then they start the appeal process, and that takes time and effort for them to go through that. And then they get to the Board of Equalization or the hearing officer, and it comes to light that they don't disagree with the value. The values, they agree is correct. They just didn't like the tax increase. And then they have to get educated that, oh, this is not a hearing about whether you like the tax increase or not. It has nothing to do with the taxes you may pay at the end of the year. You're not appealing your taxes. You're appealing your value. And so they go through all these hoops and hurdles to file an appeal, and they don't understand that they're not doing anything to affect their taxes. They're trying to affect the value of their property. In many cases, they think the value is accurate, even though they may not like the effect it has on their taxes, that they understand that their values have gone up significantly from the last year. So I guess that confusion then leads to people spending time and effort seeking an appeal that's misguided, that they think that somehow they're appealing because they don't like the jump in taxes, when in effect, it has nothing to do with that. It's about the value of the property.
And I get that. I think we can all draw a lot of scenarios around how this would affect those property owners who open this based upon what those values are, what they aren't, what are expected. But, and again, I don't see, we could sit here and be anecdotal all day, but, I could respond to you that, the older couple that have their house paid for and, they're not doing an escrow every year, and they're getting ready and trying to get limited, off a limited income, getting prepared to, pay those property taxes. That notice to that subset of maybe property owners, or in similar scenarios, could be very important. And I'm saying there are different reasons for notice and estimate. And again, I think that's where we may have to, again, to the chairman's point, see if we can figure out how to accommodate, concerns here without creating other concerns or other problems for other constituents. And I will, again, go back to not all commissioners, and maybe your commissioner and all are going to lower your millage rate, but there will be counties and cities and school boards that will not lower millage rates. And so this is very important. This is very important to those who are trying to prepare. In some cases, this is a large check to write when the bill comes due. And this is going to give some, for that purpose of notice and estimate, it puts somebody in a ballpark of understanding. So again, I think we all have concerns to the chair's, position. I think let's work on something to see if we can either clarify it, take care of some concerns, but at the same time, not create other concerns.
Glad to engage in that.
Yeah. Chairman, I don't know, I got two, but okay. Okay. Thank y'all for the meeting. And again, let's work with the author and ACG on this to see if we can, take care of these concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. Your ACC do more work out of it.
Hey, he's used to this over. No, hey, he's a veteran and he's used to this. So
Thank y'all so much.
meeting's adjourned.
Thank you. I'd like to call the Income Tax Subcommittee of the Ways and Means Committee to order at this time. The first bill we'll be hearing today is House Bill 0500. And if you come present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members, for allowing me to present the bill today. The bill I'm presenting today is something that many of you have seen before, and this is what we're asking for is around two. Many of you may be familiar with the GARJA program. The Georgia Agribusiness and Rural Jobs Act was passed. It is an income tax credit lending program for rural communities in predominantly in the agribusiness. Currently, we're in the last year, or we're tapped out as far as lending capacity under the first GARJA program, and so what we're asking for is a second round of GARJA going forward. The new round tracks the language of the old round, And for me personally, in my district, this has been a wildly successful program. It is tailored in such a way that it advantages mom and pop businesses, 250 employees or less, and in counties that have a 50,000 person population or less. So I can give you one example, and I've got some folks, if necessary, for some technical, questions. I can call in Tony Toops and Darren Harris from Advantage Capital, who are participating in the program. But I can give you just a real world example of how this impacted my district. There's a community, Pearson, Georgia. Many of you may not be familiar with where Pearson is. It's a very small town. It is the largest town in one of my counties. There's a company called Katie Bag there. It's the only company in the country that takes resin and turns it into a resin bag. So the bags that you see onions in, apples in, it's the only company in the country that does this, from resin to bag. Well, it's a family-owned, was a family-owned business, and the family the generations that started aging and aging out, and it got to a point where the family could no longer sustain management of the business. Well, there were some investors that approached the business about investing, but like many businesses, and many of you know this, it's necessary to take out loans to manage a business. They were turned down from a traditional lender. And at this point, these investors wanted to come in and inject capital, but without any place to get the money. Without Garja, Katie Bag, a business has been in our community for a significant amount of time, started by a family and ran by a family entirely. Without Garja, that business would be entirely gone. With Garja, it has been able to thrive and has a significant impact on the small community of Pearson, Georgia, with the number of jobs and the pay of jobs. So I can attest to the program's ability to inject capital into rural Georgia. And I'm asking the committee to favorably report on this bill to see if we can get another round of this going.
Thank you, Chairman Burchett. Is it not true that this, and by the way, this will be a hearing only today. All
Yes.
the bills being heard in this committee today are hearing only, but is it not true that this exact language did pass the House of Representatives this past session? And speaking of which, since another year has gone by, and members of the committee, we want to take questions, but if the committee, in our second hearing, we'd need to see updated dates on this in a committee form of a committee substitute. So I'd like to open up the questions for the committee. If any committee members have questions of Arthur.
Mr. Chairman, I do want to say this did pass on the House floor in a package of tax credit bills. This is exactly that same language, but you are correct on the dates. Thank
I
you.
can't remember who carried it, but I don't believe they were out of breath.
No, they weren't.
What kind of time span? What are we looking at?
Far out.
It's a 10-year program. So once we initiate, and I'm going to have Tony come up with me just to correct me if I'm wrong. And frankly, as a participant, he knows it inside and out and has to follow the rules as administered by the Department of Community Affairs. But it's a 10-year program, and the tax credits come in year 3, 4, 5, and 6, correct? So it's a total of 10 years, and the total liability to the state of Georgia is $60 million. It's a $100 million injection, but $60 million worth of tax credits.
I think we have a question from Representative Watson. Oh, does that you, Mr. Chairman? So
I just want to tell you, I appreciate you last year. Appreciate y'all bringing it again. We don't have enough for our rural Georgia as far as incentives for economic development. And I'm sorry it didn't pass last year, but I'm on board this year without any changes at all to the bill.
Thank you. I do want to highlight one in particular, one business that benefited from Garja. Many of you have probably heard about the governor down in Decatur County doing a groundbreaking for Danimer Scientifics that just recently went public. They were a beneficiary of the Garja program. Had it not been for Garja in the time between them going public now and where they were when they were approached with Garja, there would not have been where they are now. They were in a position where they needed capital immediately, and that capital sort of spurred along their growth.
Are there any more questions from the members of the committee? No one, I don't believe anybody's technically signed up for comments, but are there, Mr. Chairman?
Just might ask one other point. I think, it's probably been touched on, but this, as we understand it, has been used in the past and would under this bill. It's to augment any local investment that they may, acquire. This is not in lieu of, this is not a competitive type fund, if I understand that correctly. That's
100%. I'm going to let Tony chime in, but that when I agreed to carry this legislation, because I sought the legislation out because I saw what the effect it had on our community. The first question I had, Mr. Chairman, was this is not going to cut out our local lenders. We're not competing with our local lenders. In fact, it requires that the applicant have been denied by a local lender.
That's exactly correct. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, that's correct. The idea is that this is like gap financing. So a lot of times we'll partner with local banks, but the borrower has to have been attest that they've been turned down for similar type credit by a local commercial bank.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is anyone else that would like to speak for or against the bill?
I'll be brief, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your time. I just want to say, Jeremy Collins, I represent Stonehenge Capital, and we support the bill, and we appreciate this committee's support over the last several years. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience that wants to speak to the bill for or against? All right. Hearing no further comments, again, this was a hearing only, but would encourage that the next hearing that you prepare a committee substitute with the updated timelines on it and be prepared to talk about it again.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. Sorry, I was trying to get your attention if I can ask it.
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you. I understand the concept. I understand the concept that for those businesses that are having difficulty raising capital, either through banks or through private securities offerings or the like. My question is, what is the underwriting process that you all have to evaluate these applications? Because if they were turned down by banks, that's, some might see that as a red flag of they did their due diligence and underwriting and weren't comfortable making the loan. So if we're putting taxpayer money into this, what are the safeguards that we're making investments that are likely to work out?
A good question. And Tony, I don't know if you gave your full name and the company you represented last time. If you did, we'll just restate it for the members of the.
I did not. Thank you. Tony Toops with Advantage Capital. I'm our company is one of 5 fund manager participants in the Garja program. So you heard from Mr. Collins. He represents Stonehenge, one of our competitors, and there's 3 others. So yeah, the underwriting process is very rigorous. We've been doing this for 30 years, so we have developed a real specialty to focus in on companies that have great potential, but for whatever reason are tapped out. For example, like Danimer had extended its credit lines to their full capacity. They needed over $6.5 million to finance 2 canola oil fermenters, couldn't raise it through private markets or bank. Their farmer owners didn't have the cash. So we looked at the business, saw the potential. saw the ability there to pay us back. And, it was a good prudent investment of both our capital and the state's tax credit incentive. So it's a very rigorous underwriting process. Each of the companies have investment teams that identify a pipeline of companies that are qualified, and then we interact with them. Typically be referred from banks, lawyers, chambers, DCA, what have you. And then we will look into the business, do a thorough underwriting, make sure that we think they're creditworthy.
So whose capital is at risk? Is it the taxpayers' capital or private investors' capital, or a mix of both?
That's a good question. It's a mix of both. So each fund manager has basically half of the capital stack for each fund is their own capital, and it's mixed with the Georgia premium tax credit. So it's a combination.
So there is some private skin in the game. It's not just taxpayer money that's at risk, correct?
Absolutely correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for letting me ask those questions. I appreciate it.
We're actually leveraging private dollars for these investments versus taking just taxpayer dollars on some of these loans.
Well, that's correct. And that's why, we're incentivized to make sure that these investments create and retain the jobs that we've committed to up front. Because not only can we lose our own capital through a bad investment, we also could potentially be exposed to a significant financial penalty back to the state if we come underneath our job commitment and retention commitments.
Are there any further questions for the author of the bill? There we go.
I'll never say anything. What about the return on investment? You mentioned the company that if you hadn't had this, they would have gone under and they went public and they borrow X amount of money. Some of it's taxpayer, some of it private. During that period of time, is there's number of jobs it created or how much money they brought in? Is there any way to kind of show that?
Sure. So we've had Georgia Tech has done their third study on the program. They just updated it this week. And it shows that for every dollar of tax credit the state is putting into this program, it gets back $1.28 to the general fund. And you can also look at that at the local level, the county and municipal, and that's all upside to those local governments because they're not putting any tax credit in. So it's a zero cost at the end of the day, net zero cost of the credit to the state. And that's why I mentioned earlier about the exposure to financial penalties. And those numbers that each fund commits to up front for job creation and retention show to DCA, the Department of Community Affairs, that we're going to create and retain enough jobs to cover or at least be positive to this general fund over and above the cost of the tax credit. And if we're not, then we owe money back to the state.
Mr. Toops, will you explain to them in the Danimer case where you were prepaid, how you had to roll the money back into the fund?
Sure, because as Representative Burchett said, we came into Danimer at the right time. We were able to finance those canola oil fermenters that they couldn't get the capital for. That proved to McDonald's and Starbucks and Pepsi that they could make this biodegradable plastic straw material at a big scale. That was the question. Could they just do it in the lab or could they do it at a big industrial scale? Once they did that, much bigger investors came behind us, took them public, and they are now in a much better financial position than they were 4 or 5 years ago, spending $700 million, getting ready to hire 400 full-time folks. But they paid us back on their loan early because they could do it. So now under the program, we're obligated to go redeploy that capital. So we have to maintain 100% investment. So we went to Thompson, Georgia, and made an investment in a company called Thompson Plastics. And they used the money to buy 2 big plastic presses. And they are one of the country's largest manufacturers of plastic injection molding for like steering wheel components and lawnmowers.
Not to cut the debate short, this is a hearing only. And again, I don't hear anybody really speaking against the bill. But if you would get it updated, committee substitute, would love to see that Georgia Tech study. Maybe if you'd be kind enough to get it to the all the committee members in the meantime for the next meeting. And we appreciate the time. If no further questions for the author of the bill, we'll move on to the next bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All right. Now I'd like to call Representative Petrie to explain House Bill 1064. And again, this is hearing only today for all subcommittees are hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate y'all hearing this today. Everyone should have LC 43-2172 EC. This piece, real excited to talk to you about this legislation today. This is a priority piece of legislation for the governor. It is something that I feel very passionately about. And indeed, when it was introduced, we had a good bipartisan, about a good 70 co-sponsors on this measure. So House Bill 1064, very simply, this bill is about retired military income being exempted from state income tax. And as you'll see here, the way we propose to do it in this piece of legislation is that up to $17,500 of income that is received for military retirement would be exempt from state income tax for individuals under 62. I would remind you that individuals 62 to 64, all individuals that are retired in Georgia, 62 to 64, already have a $35,000 exemption and a $65,000 exemption over that age. And so this captures people under 62, provides them with that $17,500 exemption. And then if they work in this state and in a new career, as most do, and earn up to $17,500, they will have an additional exemption of $17,500 to provide them with that same $35,000 exemption. So what we do here is we try to provide an exemption for men and women who have sacrificed the most for this country and have traveled all over the world in service to this country. We want to make sure that they have an opportunity to live here. I think most of you are aware we're currently at a competitive disadvantage there with every single bordering state. And at the same time, we've made this very much focused on incentivizing people to join our workforce. All of us here today who represent our districts know the number one thing we hear from industry and from business: they can't find the labor force they need. So this bill is targeted on incentivizing disciplined and hardworking men and women to take jobs in this state to help us to with that huge challenge we have today with workforce. So I will add a couple of other things, in particular as a border county, as Chairman Stevens knows, and some of the others here, like Representative Smith. We in particular suffer with this in border counties where our adjacent counties, you cross a river and you save 5.75% of your income. So I think this is good public policy for Georgia, certainly good for our industry and for economic development. And Mr. Chairman, glad to answer any questions y'all may have in this matter.
Just as a point of clarification, Representative Petrie, you I just want to make sure that it's clear. You mentioned up to $17,500 of additional income, and line 16 reads that provided that he or she has Georgia, beginning on 15, provided that he or she has Georgia earned income otherwise included in his or her Georgia taxable net income in an amount that exceeds $17,500.
Correct. I misspoke. And I thank you for clarifying that. The individual must earn an additional must have $17,500 of earned income in Georgia outside of their retirement income in order to get that other exemption. That is correct, sir.
Thank you for the clarification.
Sorry, no, that was a
couple of
good
quick questions
clarification
for you. Recognize Representative Buckner for a question.
This is just for my clarification. I represent part of Fort Benning, and I've been working with Senator Harbison on this for a couple of years. Is this essentially the same thing he's been carrying?
I'm not familiar with Senator Harbison's. Many of us here have been working on this for a long time. There's a multitude of versions. So I'm not familiar, Representative, but I will tell you that if you look at all our bordering states, so Alabama to your west, exempts all military retirement income.
Correct.
And of course, Tennessee and Florida have no state income tax. North Carolina has now exempted all military retirement income. And to our east, across our river, we've got South Carolina, which has a $17,500 exemption, more similar to this. But I can't speak to that particular bill. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Thanks.
Represent Chairman Stevens. Sorry, Chairman Stevens waves. So are there any other further questions from members of the committee? Chairman Blackman?
Just thank the author of the bill and certainly thank Governor Kemp and his support of our military through this legislation. And I know we're awaiting a fiscal note, which will, be getting soon and be able to look at this. But, I think it honors our heroes, servicemen and women appropriately upon retirement. I would like to ask the author if there's any, leeway or consideration if we did look at that second earned income component offline and see if there's a way to work it in an up to fashion, perhaps.
Mr. Chairman, I would look forward to those conversations.
Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you.
I'd like to do that. And I would emphasize, meant to mention that the fiscal note, we do have, we pretty much know what it will be. And we've had some good reliable sources get this, even though we don't have the official note back. This is basically anywhere from 53 on the low end to a $60 million fiscal hit.
Well, is Chairman Petrie, as you're aware, we want to trust but verify.
Oh,
So
I certainly hope
we
so.
do need to, and I'm just joking because this committee and as does the entire General Assembly stands in full support of our military servicemen and women in the state of Georgia and thank them for their present and past service. And I too commend Governor Kemp and his efforts to do the right thing by these men and women. So thank you for your efforts on bringing this bill. We look forward to getting that fiscal note and seeing you in the follow-up meeting.
Very good. Thank
No
you
other
much.
questions. The meeting's adjourned.